And we're back. Our final five rankings of the prior to the 2021 NBA season point guard list. We've got them all up there now. Check all the videos out. We got every single position ranked up. But these are the five best players probably in the league outside of maybe LeBron James and Kawhi and KD and like maybe
Sure.
Giannis and Anthony Davis.
You could say that of these five guys, they're definitely all top 25 players, undoubtedly, probably
Easily.
arguably even top 15 players, all of them. You could definitely say that. Before we get into it, definitely subscribe if you can. But anyways, we're going to get into it with number five. I see a nice dog in the background. Oh, there she goes. But number five, here we are.
Here at number five, we have a guy who is a former MVP threat. And I think he's going to put up an MVP year this year. I think he definitely has the potential to. We have Russell Westbrook coming at number five. This is exactly where I had him. This is kind of makes sense for me, but I can definitely see him jumping up even higher. He's got the potential, especially on that Washington team.
Yeah, I would say before even getting into him himself, what it came down to was I had Westbrook sixth and you had him fifth, and you had Simmons sixth and you had Westbrook fifth. So we just had the
Yeah.
opposite order there, and we kind of had to discuss who we think was higher. And the only reason I had Simmons higher than Westbrook to begin with is because the potential for an MVP year is there. But if I had to bet money on who's more likely to win an MVP, I'd probably still take Westbrook, at least this specific year. So that's kind of where it just comes down to in terms of putting him ahead of a guy like Westbrook. There's just, I think, more likelihood that, like you said, Westbrook has just a fantastic year again. And even last year, he had a fantastic year by everyone's measures, except for the fact that he's compared to guys like Luka and James Harden nowadays.
And that's the thing, right? These guys have stepped their game up. If we're looking at the numbers from 3, 4 years ago, there was no 30-point scorers per game.
Yep.
There was no guys going 30 and 10. That's unheard of. LeBron was winning MVP at 27 and 7, 27 and 8, 27, 7 and 7. Luka gets 30, 10 and 10. Westbrook doing 25, 10 and 10 is now lackluster. And last year he put up a couple of assists per game. Makes sense. He was with James Harden. But no, I can definitely see him having a much better year this year than he did last year. And that's saying something because they built that, as much as they built that Houston team around Harden, they really built that team around Westbrook last year by getting rid of the center, by allowing that to be really open. And Westbrook had one of his best driving years he's ever had. And I can definitely see him putting that up together again. The only difference now is that he's got Bradley Beal to pass the ball to. And as much as he might not be Harden, it's still a pretty damn good option. And then you have Davis Bertans and all the other players. It's a perfect team for Westbrook to go to.
Yeah, I definitely think a lot of people are doubting the role players there. But even again, based off last year, he might have had a bit of dip in terms of points, but he was still
Oh, his points went up last year by 5 points over the year before.
yeah, I just mean in comparison to kind of his MVP years. But even then, he was still fifth in point guards with 27.2. He was 11th in assists with 7, tied for sixth in steals, 1.6, but also third in minutes played. So we talk about it a lot where
Yeah.
explosive players tend to lose stride as they get older. Well, Russell Westbrook isn't. He's out there, and like I said about Kyle Lowry, when he actually seems to almost seem hobbled when he's running around, Russell Westbrook seems very still out there, active, and able to
Of
do all the things
course.
he used to. Yeah, he used to still be, or able to still be the player he always has been. He was also fifth in wins added, fifth in efficiency, third highest usage rate, third best defensive real plus minus on this list as well. So that's something we often forget about Westbrook, just how good he is defensively. And it's because he is such a good athlete. There's few people who could keep up with Russell Westbrook versus the other way around.
To be fair, if we're looking defensively on top compared to the guys on top of him, he's probably the best one there.
Yeah, probably.
Um, but I don't. It just his game style is something that eventually is gonna age, right? Every driver like that has has had to age eventually. Most of them don't age beautifully. He's getting to that point where he's gonna start aging soon. So I think this is probably one of his last amazing years. But I can definitely see great things happening with Westbrook and Washington. It's his team again. It's a better team than what he had around him in OKC, unless you're talking like Harden and Durant years. But it's a better team than him and Paul George had around them.
Yeah, you just have to hope that it's kind of always been an issue with Russell Westbrook is obviously the turnovers as well. Again, we talk about, of course, a lot of top players do have them, but he was only one of only three players to have over four turnovers at the point guard position, and one of them was Trae Young, who had almost five. So at the end of the day, he really does need to work on at least being a low three type of turnover guy if he wants to actually win an MVP. But in terms of, again, yes, having a super large role on a team where it's going to be more what Westbrook does opposed to because Beal could score in any offense. So they're really going to make it about Westbrook, like you're hinting. And that we're probably going to see at minimum a similar year to last year, but it could be even better too. He could be in conversation for an MVP if Washington makes the playoffs. That's a true reality.
Oh, and they will. Let's be honest. They were ninth seed last year. They had a bunch of young players, a lot of rookies in their first year. They had Davis Bertans, who was a guy who was their second best player last year, but not someone anyone considers a top three player on any contending team.
Yeah.
And Bradley Beal had a career, wasn't even considered an All-Star. But if you look at that team and you add Russell Westbrook, there's no doubt about it, they're a playoff team. There's no doubt about it, they're a top six in the Eastern Conference. If anything, they might be even higher. John Wall in that team would make them in a playoff team. But we're talking Russell Westbrook.
Yeah, that's definitely something that's a very fair point. Where, like you said, without any point guard essentially in that team, I believe Ish Smith was kind of the leading point guard.
Ish Smith was the best point guard on that team.
Yeah, when he went down, now you replace Ish Smith with Russell Westbrook, and you were already a nine seed. And it was really just because the bubble. I mean, they were an eight seed before the bubble happened. If it was a regular season, they very well could have just snuck into the eight seed and been that final playoff team. So there's a very good chance, like you're hinting, that they improve off that. They didn't get Westbrook to be a worse team, obviously. They got him to be a better team. But they know what they had already, and that was a borderline playoff team. And now, like you're saying, they're probably going to be a playoff team. And if he could do anything that's even along the lines of any of his best years, we're definitely going to have him in one of the five candidates for an MVP. Because ultimately, this was a guy who was doing things that guys like only Oscar Robertson does. And that's
Now Luka Doncic does.
yeah, but even then, in terms of doing it year over year, in terms of the amount of triple doubles, it's still really only Westbrook and Robertson in terms of all-time discussion. So that's really where a guy like Westbrook has the ability to overlap some other guys who might be better.
By the end of this year, Doncic's probably going to have more triple doubles than Oscar Robertson, but he's not going to have more than Russell Westbrook because Russell Westbrook will still keep putting up more.
Exactly.
He has a chance to average another triple double this year. I think he's going to come close. I think some of his stats are going to go down. But if he gets 20 points, 10 and 10, that's a fantastic year. And that puts him, I'd say, in a spot higher on this list even. But you're funny how you mentioned the bubble, because the bubble is the only reason why Russell Westbrook's number 5. If we're not talking the bubble, if the bubble never happened, there's no way this guy that we're about to talk about even cracks our top 7. Let's be honest. If this bubble doesn't happen, Jamal Murray is not a number 4 point guard in this league. But the bubble happened. Jamal Murray showed up. That's all there is to it. That team was a threat to make it to the finals, mainly because of Jamal Murray. Jokic was an amazing player. He is the leader of that team. That's his team. But whenever it came down to the playoffs, you need a scorer. You need a guy that's going to do all those little things, and Murray was that player.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely did have a big step in the bubble. I don't necessarily would just blame it on the environment itself. I would say in general, it's just a guy who, in any environment, he could have had a great playoff run. He likely would have. He was really poised for a breakout year. He did have over 23 points per game in February in almost 10 starts. So it's a guy who a lot of people around Denver knew what he already was coming out of Kentucky. He knew he was a scorer. Personally, I wasn't very big on him, which is ironic because we are Canadians, and he was one of the bigger Canadian prospects coming out of the draft.
Ever since Wiggins.
Yeah, and to me, I just didn't feel like he performed well at Kentucky, but recently, in the last, I would say, 2 years, he's really taken off as a top 10 point guard, and now specifically as a top 5 point guard with that playoff performance last year. If we just look at his overall stats, he's not top 10 really in anything through the regular season, but like you said, he was just so clutch down the stretch, going head to head with guys like Donovan Mitchell, who he also had in the top 3.
He's got to show up during the regular season, though.
Definitely. He definitely does. And I guess that's just us being confident that what we saw towards the end of last year for the last 2 months of the season plus the playoffs is Jamal Murray is going to be able to do that, especially alongside a guy. Yeah, definitely, especially alongside a guy like Jokic, and especially when they do have guys like Millsap who are obviously going to have less production. He's going to have guys like Michael Porter Jr. to pass to. Will Barton's still on the team. Gary Harris always does what he does. So there's a lot of good players around him that obviously help make him so good. But yeah, in terms of just being a pure scorer, in terms of being a clutch guy, in terms of not being scared at the moment, in terms of likely going to be an all-star very soon, probably this year, Jamal Murray definitely one of the most likely candidates for all of those things.
But another category is one of the most likely candidates in is the most likely to have the biggest drop on this list. If he doesn't put up a similar play to he showed us in the playoffs that he can do, we're gonna know he can do it, but he's not gonna make the top 10. His regular season last year was not top 10. It was barely top 15 for point guards. Let's be honest. He does not play that well. He did not play that well in the regular season, and he's done it for 4 years now. So he's probably the most likely to drop out of our top 5. I think that his play in the bubble was amazing. He was the best player in the bubble. He was literally outstanding on that Denver team. But he has to keep putting up those kind of playoff numbers, because right now, if he does show up and puts up another 18 point per game year and he doesn't actually take a step during the regular season, sure, Denver doesn't really need him in the playoffs. But if he doesn't go over that 20 points per game, then I'm probably going to take him out of my top 10, to be honest, not just my top 5. But with that being said, I don't think he's going to do that. I think he's going to take a step. I think he showed the world that he has a step, and that wasn't his first playoffs. It's the year before last year. He also put up over 20 in the playoffs. So clearly he showed up a little more then, but all-star players eventually will show up in the regular season, and that's the only way that he can maintain a spot, but I have faith that he will.
Yeah, to me, I have a lot of faith that he will too. I agree that of all of the top fives we have, he's probably most likely to drop out because all of them are a bit more established. Even DeAndre Ayton, who is a rookie, we just know what Ayton's going to do.
Even 5 to 10
Yeah,
more established.
yeah, but at the same time, he reminds me of a guy like Fred VanVleet, who they both have the ability to play in the big time moments. They both take a lot of shots. They both take a lot of big shots, and they make them. But aside from that, too, they're both two of the more efficient passers in the league. Obviously, VanVleet has a higher assist number, but in terms of assist ratio or turnover ratio, sorry, it's VanVleet and Murray who are 1-2. Murray was number 2 in the
Yeah,
league.
well, let's be honest. Murray's not a point guard when it comes to playmaking.
I would say it's not a matter of that at all. It's a matter of the Denver Nuggets system. Because if you
Yep.
look at guys who weren't starters, Monte Morris has the least turnovers of anyone last year, and he's a very good backup who did start a number of games. So I think Denver just has a very good system that doesn't allow point guards to turn the ball over a lot. They have a good coaching system that teaches how to pass.
To me, they just don't play point guard.
Uh,
Murray's averaged 3 assists per game throughout his career. 3.
yeah, but he also had 5 last
There's
year.
centers that do better. No, he didn't. He had 4.
He had 4.8. That's 2
5
points.
or 4.
That's much closer to 5. He rounded up for stats that are much lower than that before. But regardless, he's a guy who has the ability to definitely go up to 6 or 7 assists per game. He's never going to be a guy who's going to go up to 10 or anything like that. But he's definitely not a bad passer by any means. They definitely, when Jokic isn't the guy who's running the offense, it's definitely Murray who's doing it behind him. And he's a very, very capable ball handler and passer at that.
Well, we'll see. And like I say, in the playoffs, he showed that he was a great, fantastic, and a special player. He can show up, but he's got to show me in the regular season. If he's not getting more than 5 assists per game, he's got to put up 25 points to maintain this.
Yeah, I mean,
We'll see.
It's definitely something that you want him to do. But again, he is someone who got better throughout the year, and the fact that he did have 4.8, again, it's something that he's definitely going to be able to develop. I mean, in reality, it's not, again, something I'm shy of. And if you look at post All-Star, he did average 5 assists per game. So, and if you look at the wins and losses, he actually averaged 5.1 in the wins. So it's a guy who I know is capable of doing that. But I do agree, of all our top fives, still has
His team wins when he's productive. It makes sense.
Yeah, but I mean, the team's going to win.
No, I agree though.
Regardless, but yeah, I definitely agree of the top 5. He's most likely to have a year that he needs to be very successful for it to be to keep this spot.
And I didn't look up where he was in win shares during the regular season, but I bet you it wasn't in the top 10.
No, I'm not sure off the top of my head either if he was top 10. I don't believe he was. But
I know Lowry had more. VanVleet had more.
Definitely.
VanVleet was a better player in the regular season last year than Jamal Murray.
I mean, it depends what you look at specifically. Again, they were very similar just towards the fact that Murray had better year towards, like I said, a couple months at the end of the year, the playoff run, but it's not an argument of who's better
Keeps
player. The other
keeps my
team,
fingers crossed for a player like Freddie though,
it's
because if in the regular season they can put up a player, he can do this, and then in the playoffs be that special. Like Jamal
either,
Murray is that special in the playoffs.
definitely.
He's great.
Either way, we're getting a bit off topic, so we'll move on.
Yeah, I know. We'll keep going on. Sorry about that. So we keep just Jamal Murray. He does make a number 4 spot. Great player. He could easily crack the top 3 if he plays like he did in the playoffs. Right now, we definitely have a lot of high thoughts to say about him, with him making in our top 5, which is very, very, very difficult to do. But moving on from Jamal Murray here at the number 3 spot, we have a player who it just makes sense why he's there. Kyrie Irving. It's crazy he didn't have the greatest year. He hasn't had he's had solid years, but he's been injury prone. But that Brooklyn team looks good.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's really just a matter of the games played, right? Like if you just take the very small sample size, Kyrie had a great year. He had over 27 points per game. He was 4th in points for point guards, 8th in rebounds. He was near the top in terms of he was 5th in usage. So it's a guy also 1st in free throw percentage. So it's a guy who's always at the top of the league in certain stats like that. But yeah, he needs to be healthy. That's really the big thing. He's number 3 because we know skill-wise, he's undoubtedly a top 3 point guard. There's nights he's the best point guard, but he doesn't do it over a full season like the guys ahead of him have, and even like some of the guys below him are. So if he plays only 30 to 40 games again, it's definitely going to be it's definitely going to be a big question mark on Kyrie Irving. But as long as he plays, we know he's going to be justified right here.
His talent level, he's still the best dribbler in the league.
Mm-hmm.
He's one of the most clutch players in the league. He only has 1 championship, but he was in 3 finals in a row with LeBron. So we know what kind of player he is. He has some chemistry issues in certain places. I don't think he'll have any chemistry issues in Brooklyn because they only have vets. They don't have young punks. They don't have kids to get in their way and think that they're better than Kyrie Irving. They have proven players that Kyrie knows he's better than, and they're going to have Kyrie and Kevin Durant, and anyone who's going to talk bad, well, Kyrie has so much say on that team. Like, there's not going to be a chemistry issue like you saw in Boston, like you saw in Cleveland. I see him having a great year this year, and Kyrie and KD is going to be special.
Yeah, I definitely hope so. I mean, ultimately, they're 2 of the best shooters, not just at their position,
In
but
the whole
in the
league,
entire league. Yeah,
ever.
both of them are towards always the top in true shooting percentage. Kyrie, again, limiting time last year, top 5, 2nd in 3-point percentage for point guards. So it's a guy who we know takes a lot of shots, but honestly, he's super efficient.
Yeah.
I like a guy who hits 90% from the line, but also has the ability to hit the 3 super good. He's a guy too who, like you mentioned, he does only have 1 NBA championship, but at the same time, if we look through the top 15, other than Steph Curry, I don't believe anyone else has one other than Kyle Lowry. And if we really look at the two big moments, of course, Kyle Lowry wasn't big in that playoff run, but Kyrie Irving was so much bigger in that championship. He hit the shot that put them ahead to win the game ultimately. So yes, obviously LeBron had that block, but a guy like Kyrie's the guy who he wanted to take that shot, he hit it, and it looks perfect for his career. Even if he doesn't win another one, he hit a Game 7 winner essentially in an NBA.
And yeah, no, he is. That was a special game. But yeah, no, Kyrie. We know the talent he brings, and playing with LeBron has just raised his IQ. As much as he was still causing a lot of issues in Boston, causing a lot of issues when he left Cleveland. But like you say, he knows what to do. He's learned from the best. He's shown up in the playoffs. The difference between him and a player like Jamal Murray, he's proven himself in the regular season. Like Kyrie can be on a team where it's just Kyrie, and they're probably going to win 35, 40 games just based on Kyrie if he plays the whole year.
Yeah, and I mean it's a guy who, like you said, after playing with LeBron, he did really take the next big step where his points per game went up dramatically, and it's been consistent throughout. He's been a leader of a couple teams who, unfortunately, they haven't had the playoff success we'd like in Boston, but they were a number 1 seed, I believe, that first year he was there, or second year he was there. So we know that Kyrie has the ability, obviously, like you said, to lead a team. And in Brooklyn, they have the ability we've spoken about it off there, they could honestly be a number 1 seed. They could also be a 7 seed, but they definitely have the potential on that team to be a number one seed. If Kyrie plays 65, 70 games, Kevin Durant does the same, undoubtedly they're going to likely be a top three seed, honestly.
And that's just the way it's going to be likely if they're all healthy, though. But that's a big question mark. If they're all healthy, he could easily get hurt again and not play the whole year.
Definitely.
We
But
don't know, right?
yeah, if they do play though, it just seems like Kyrie definitely, even though some people critique his media comments, it just feels like he's in his own zone where he just doesn't care anymore. He just wants to put the ball in the net and he just wants to win. And it really just feels like even last year in that limited time, he just took another step where he's just like he's on another level. He's in his zone. He doesn't care, like I said, what anyone's thinking. And that's why I think no matter like Kyrie deserves the top three spot because I'm confident he's gonna play. But yeah, if he doesn't, it's hard too, right? Like it really comes down to a guy like Steph Curry, who you had number three, where they're in a
Yep.
similar situation where they didn't play a lot, and you could definitely put Steph Curry number four right behind Kyrie based off what he's done before, and that just happens to be that both of us were more confident in Kyrie than both of us were more confident in Curry because you were very confident in Steph versus I wasn't.
Very confident in
So
Curry.
yeah, so that's
Very
just
confident.
yeah, so I guess that's just the difference of really the fact that we've seen Kyrie be in Cleveland and have to be the only guy there, and we haven't really seen Curry do it for a full year. So we see how they take it. I just know alongside an All-Star, Kyrie's going to look very good this year.
I'd still put Curry alongside an All-Star before I put Kyrie, but especially Durant. That's a proven championship window. But that being said, Kyrie's still a great player. He's still fantastic. He's the best ball handler in the league, hands down. It's not even close. The stuff he can do with that ball, it's ridiculous. That's why we call him Uncle Drew. That's why you had a whole movie based around him.
Mm.
He was the old man in that movie, by the way, in case you haven't seen it. Just little tips. It wasn't a 75-year-old man. It was Kyrie Irving dressed as an old man.
No,
But
I think a
great
big
movie.
Yeah, I think a big stat for him too is even though his turnover number isn't the lowest among point guards, his turnover percentage for if you actually factor in those 20 games last year was the lowest among starters. Where in terms of when he has the ball, the amount of times he turns it over based off that was the lowest for starters. So yes, he might
Fantastic ball handler.
exactly he might not always like his turnover numbers might be higher than a guy like VanVleet or Murray, but in terms of the possessions he's going to lose, it's going to be very few. He's one of the best in the league at that.
It's like I seen a play the other day where LaMelo Ball was just dribbling all casually, and Milwaukee Flynn came by and just took the ball from him like there was no tomorrow.
Yeah,
And I just can't see that happening to Kyrie Irving.
definitely not. Definitely not.
But with that being said, Kyrie still could be number 2 on this list very easily if he has a great year next year. But right now, I'm putting my money on number 2 before Kyrie Irving. Number 2 in our list here, we have Dame Lillard, the best rapper in the NBA. Like I know I've talked bad about Portland here and there, about the potential that they haven't been able to win it all, but consistently year over year, that team gets hurt. That team fails to put extra stars around him besides just CJ McCollum. And let's be honest, when you're looking at other players, other teams in the league where second star is Anthony Davis, CJ's just not on the same planet.
Yeah, I mean, Damian Lillard ultimately just finds himself in a similar situation to James Harden in that regard, where the farthest that team's ever made it has been the conference finals, and then they just get beat by better teams. I don't even know if the Rockets they've made a conference finals, if I'm not mistaken, but the Blazers have made 2 in the last 4 years. But still, like you said, they haven't done enough to actually put themselves over anymore. And we know he's one of the top probably 3 just pure scorers in the NBA, but it hasn't resulted in playoff. It hasn't resulted in a playoff championship, which is just prevents him from, I guess, being higher. Where number one also hasn't won a title, but everyone knows the potential of number one, and he already has essentially a better stat line than Damian Lillard. I just find it ironic that when we looked at all of the other positions, a huge stat that we went off was wins added and value added. And Damian Lillard was like LeBron James, like Giannis, like James Harden, like Anthony Davis,
Same level.
2 times as much as any other player at the position, including the guy at number one. He had twice as less wins added than Damian Lillard. And normally that would get you the 1 spot. But because we know that the guy ahead of him just has a bit more tools in his arsenal, he still doesn't get the number 1 spot. And that really sucks for him because even in a year where he essentially does
Sucks for Dame.
Yeah, even in the year where he essentially does everything he's supposed to, not just in terms of numbers on the board, but making the whole team better, they still didn't have much success. So that's
And
something that just brings him down just one
that's what it
spot.
comes down to.
Yeah, that's just what it came down to for me. Because normally, looking at things like that, I would have put him number one without hesitation. But still,
Yeah, I my main reason why he wouldn't be over top of our guy we have here at number one is the career potential. A bad season from Damian Lillard is a season where he probably gets 24 or 25 points per game in their ninth seed. Like that's a bad year.
I would say that's actually an average year. If you look at it, last year's early breakout. I believe before that, he
He was
really
like 24-7, wasn't he?
he had
24-9.
I believe he had 25 the year before that, taking a quick look. Yeah, 25 and 8, 26. His
Yeah,
career high before that was 27. So that 30, I mean, we don't know if it's even going to be consistent, like you're saying. The fact
that,
he's even number two over a guy like Kyrie, some people might question because this year, Kyrie could have a much better year than Damian Lillard. Damian Lillard,
but again, Kyrie, uh, Kyrie was hurt last year. Damian Lillard just had a career year.
yeah, exactly. And
That's
I
the main
guess,
difference to me.
yeah, and the hope, obviously, with him being above Irving is that he has another year similar to that, where he probably has a couple years left in this 30 point per game area. But it's very possible that he could just go back down to 26 and he ends up somewhere in the top five instead of number
Still
two.
a great player if you put him around. If you put him with the good players around him, he can still be a leader of a winning team. It just so
Absolutely.
happens that it's on that team that he needs more support than just a B-rate star like McCollum. They need either another really big star or they need to bring in someone. I hope Nurkic is that player for them this year. But Lillard, it's just sad to say because any other year before the person we had number one got drafted into the NBA, if Lillard would have had a year like he had last year, he would have been the number one point guard in the league.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he had
Just
yeah, like he had over seven plus 70 value compared to the guy who's at number two, who's number one on this list. Who, like you said, if he wasn't drafted, it's an even wider margin for Damian Lillard. He had over, for example, value added in terms of the guy, not including the guy at number one. Before we spoil it, in comparison to Trae Young, who was third, he had over 100 more points in the value added sector. So this is a guy who clearly is a huge asset to the Portland Trailblazers, but somehow still can't find himself in the top spot.
okay. Here at number one, numero uno, the difference between a player like Damian Lillard, the real only reason he's not number one in this league is because the player at number one is a generational player. He has a potential to be the best all time. Actually, he's got the potential to be the greatest. I'm not saying he is. I'm not saying he'll get there. He has the potential to be there. At worst, he's a top 10 player in this league. He'll never get underneath that.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy who,
It's incredible. We have Luka Doncic at number one. What a great player. Great young kid.
yeah, he's a guy who it seems like when he came out of the draft, he obviously fell from number one because there were some people who were skeptical on him coming out, whether he could actually replicate the success we've seen in the leagues overseas whenever he came over. And it's a guy today, if you redid that draft, anyone would have taken him number one. Even if you're a team like Sacramento, who felt like they needed to pick the best player at the position, if they knew there was a chance to even get Luka Doncic through a trade, they easily would have traded that Marvin Bagley trade. So it's not something where anyone in the draft, if they had an option, maybe they would do it. It's an option where absolutely they would do it. Atlanta would not.
Looking back, you'd give away your first round, your best player on your team, and the number two overall pick to get a player like Luka Doncic.
Yeah, Atlanta would not do that trade over. I mean, if they did, they'd be absolutely crazy. It's a guy who, in every category, was essentially top 10 for point guards. Third in points, first in rebounds, tied for second in assists, first in efficiency.
In every category across every position, he was top 10.
Yeah, I mean, fourth highest value added in the whole league. So, yeah, that definitely speaks to it alone, and that's in comparison to, I believe he was even better than a guy like Giannis, if I'm not mistaken, in that regard.
Fourth in value added, and the guy can barely, or the guy plays passable average defense at best.
Yeah, exactly. He did have, like you're saying, one of the best offensive RPMs, and that's obviously allows him to maybe suffer a bit on the defensive end. But offensively, he just has so many tools in his arsenal. Like I said in the other video, where of course Miller's a great scorer, but in terms of just never knowing what he's going to do next, the unpredictability factor, Luka Doncic is just unsurmountable in that regard. He just can't. No one could replicate what he has the potential to do on the court, other than a guy like LeBron James. And even then, when he gets in the air, because LeBron is older and he's obviously bigger, just being crafty in terms of getting almost like an underhand layup or whatever it is.
Luka's more creative.
Absolutely. So there's just elements to his game that we know probably make him top five NBA. If we just pick the top five players, just one through all the positions, some people would definitely agree Luka is top five NBA. Probably more likely top 10
Oh,
because you have guys like Kawhi and Durant. But overall, definitely.
I think Luka is a better player than Kawhi and Durant right now. And I think next year is going to show it. I don't think Luka. I don't think Durant's ever put up an offensive year anywhere close. I know he's a better defensive player, but he's putting up years like Russell Westbrook was a couple of years ago, but efficiently, and putting up more assists. And he's in his second year in the NBA. He's going into his third year in the NBA. Third year. This is usually the year where people make the biggest jump. This is their third year. What kind of jump can he make outside of defensively? There's no I'm way too young to ever watch Oscar Robertson play. I've watched a little bit of his highlights and I've read a lot about him. And to me, Luka has that creativity like someone like the Big O did. I mean, he grabs the boards and leads the league in assists, and he will for probably the next 10 years. And then you throw in a shooting ability on the level of Kevin Durant. And I know he's not the tallest player. He's more of a shooting guard for guarding people. He'll guard probably the weaker person. But in all reality, like that Dallas team is so set up with Luka and KP, Porzingis. Doncic and Porzingis are just going to dominate this league for the next 10 years. And outside of Giannis, and LeBron right now, he's still one of the best players on the planet, but in a year or two, like over the next 10 years, outside of Giannis, Luka is the best player in the league.
Yeah, I mean, with those guys getting older, like you said, it definitely gives him a lot of leeway to jump into definitely one of the top three spots in the NBA, especially too if he does start to have the playoff runs, ends up obviously winning a championship, which is very possible, especially if a guy like KP stays healthy and they do have a good team around him. But it's definitely a big factor that he does, I think, need KP there for some of the success, where, like you said, in terms of maybe putting him above a guy like Durant, of course, his assist numbers, of course, are going to be higher, but at the same time, Durant had multiple 30-point per game years, including a 32-point per game year. So I don't think Doncic necessarily career-wise is at his level yet, because again, he did average over 4 turnovers per game. If you take his assist to turnover ratio, it is just above over 2, which isn't that great, to be honest. So it's an area where he still has room to improve, but that's why he's number one, because even in a year where he was so great, he still has room to improve. He could easily be he could easily be a triple double guy who also puts up 30 per game, which is something that we haven't heard of except for guys like Oscar Robertson and Russell Westbrook, like you mentioned.
And that's just it, right? We don't know what he does things that nobody else can do, and the guy is second year in the league. I think it was Ryan Hollins that we seen, the ESPN analyst or NBA analyst, that former player that played with Doncic overseas and came across and said after the draft and kind of laughed at everyone and said, guys, what are you guys doing? This guy's easily the number one overall pick. He should have been the most clear number one overall pick since LeBron James. He was that good of a player before he came to the NBA. People sleep on the EuroLeague. EuroLeague is better basketball than NCAA. I don't care how many Americans are watching this. Go watch EuroLeague basketball. It's a higher level quality of play. There's professional players that are they play a very, very smart brand of basketball. Most of these guys are typically between their mid-20s to late 30s, mid-30s. They're in the prime of their careers. They're people that have been playing basketball for 15, 20 years compared to the NCAA, where even the best team in the NCAA is still at times going to play a player who will, they're going to play on their bench who's not ever going to make a EuroLeague roster, who's not ever going to be a professional player outside of it. Like the consistency 1 through 15 in EuroLeague is on another level compared to anything outside of the NBA. So the fact that we were sleeping on Doncic and he came over here and he's just proving us all wrong, it goes to show.
Yeah, I mean, it's a guy who's also not only been playing in the EuroLeague, but he's been doing it since he was 16. So, I mean, it's been 5 years since he's been playing it at professional level basketball, essentially. And that's why he is so much more mature than so many guys who are going into their third year, where we obviously know guys like Trae Young are great players. But guess what? He was number 10 on his list. And you know why we had him number 10? Because he's so immature as a player. And you can't say the same about Luka, because he's a guy who already had the Mavs seeming like a team that a lot of people want to jump on that bandwagon.
Yep.
Ride them out as a potential sleeper team to sneak into a deep playoff run even this year and even last year. So many people are high on them. He's a guy who gets drafted as a shooting guard / small forward, and now he's playing point guard. Okay. You could put him anywhere just because
he's essentially LeBron James, but not as athletically gifted.
Yeah, but
and a better shooter.
Yeah, and like we said, he makes up for it by being just that much more creative. Yeah, what he lacks in the athleticism department makes up for somewhere else. There's a lot of critique even about his weight gain, but I mean, it doesn't that's just everyone looks different when they get weight, right? Like he could be building muscle and it looks differently. We don't know that. We just don't know. I wouldn't doubt Luka Doncic until he's actually on the court in the regular season, and neither of us are doubting him based on the fact we have him number 1.
Yep, I can't agree with you more. To me, he's a sleeper MVP candidate, which is crazy to say the word sleeper before that, because the guy puts up 30, 10, and 10 in his second year.
Yep.
Like we're talking about earlier about how LeBron James is so good and has been so good ever since he started. He was not this good in the second year. Like I get Luka has a better team around him, but that being said, like Dallas is still a playoff team. They're still a successful team. Luka has brought success there.
Yeah, I would say if I had to put money on an MVP, as long as Dallas makes the playoffs, he would be my pick. Where we talked about it with LeBron, where you do get the voters do get voter fatigue, and you want to see other guys win it.
Giannis is not going to win this year.
Exactly, he's won it 2 in a row. And unless they have like a 72-10 year, and Giannis just blow out 34 and 15, or just some insurmountable year, it's just not going to happen again. I don't think, and my money would probably go on Luka.
It's not 2K.
Exactly. If he has any year similar to this year or better, he would be my lock as long as that team makes the playoffs.
I don't see how he doesn't get better. He's only gotten better every year. His first year, it took time to adapt to the NBA speed. His second year, he finally had a running mate in KP. KP was coming off of an injury. Porzingis hadn't played in 2 years. It took a little bit of time to get the chemistry built up. By the time the playoffs came, they were together. That team was great. They were a solid team. I actually put them probably 3rd seed next year. And that's given the fact that they haven't even traded for a 3rd star yet, which it looks like they will. Remember, Porzingis and Hardaway Jr. were together. They were one of the worst teams in the league when they played for the Knicks. Now, like I'm talking them to be better than any team in the Western Conference that aren't in LA.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely number 3 is definitely high hopes for them.
Doncic's going to have a great year. I have nothing but confidence.
Yeah, no, definitely.
I was just talking there. So there we are. Doncic is number 1. Positional rankings are done. Next time we're going to have to rank a top players in the league overall, just so we can have a bit more intense of a battle. Because every single position, it was a clear-cut number 1 in every single position except for center. Clear cut. And I'd love to see how these guys rank up against each other, because there's no one at a point guard that's anywhere close to Luka Doncic right now. There's no one at a small forward that's anywhere close to LeBron James. And there's no one at shooting guard anywhere close to James Harden.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, even with center, it was a unanimous decision. We both had the same guy at center winning. We had that at every single position.
Every single position.
Exactly. Versus like you said, top 5 NBA, I'm sure LeBron James would probably still get it based on LeBron. But when it gets to every single other player,
you can argue.
Definitely gets down to a lot of different factors. But with that being said, before we even get into that, maybe that's something that, like you said, we restructure our list next year, take a different strategy.
Maybe we'll do a mid-year rank.
Definitely. But with that being said, we are looking to do some team previews. They are going to be released by the end of this week, so definitely check that out. And with 2020 coming to an end too, maybe we'll take that strategy and we'll do a top 50 players of the top 2020 or something along those lines too.
Yeah, who knows, right? The future is limitless. So we want you guys along for the ride to subscribe, like, comment. The more you guys like and comment, the more our videos get recommended. The happier we get, the more effort we put into our videos.
Yeah,
So put them out there, guys. Come on board, watch them all. Like we're at about 120 or 130, if not probably 150 or 60 at this point of videos. So with that being said, hop on them. We have content. Subscribe, watch them all. Bring us in the limelight.
and that's all. Have a good one.
Thanks.